Daniel sat alone in the dim light of his living room, the rain tapping gently against the window like soft whispers of a past he could never forget, and the house felt impossibly quiet, heavier than usual, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. He stared at the flickering candle on the table, its small flame dancing in the stillness, and felt the weight of years pressing on him, years since Elena had left, leaving him with Lucas, their teenage son, and a silence that had grown so familiar it almost became part of him. Daniel's thoughts wandered, as they often did, drifting back to memories that made his chest ache, a quiet laugh shared over breakfast, the way Elena's hair caught the morning light, the softness in her eyes when she looked at him as if he were the only person in the world, and suddenly the ache was sharper, sharper than it had been in years, because he realized he missed more than her presence. He missed the feeling of being alive in her love, the warmth that had once surrounded every corner of their home, a warmth now replaced by echoes and shadows. Lucas's presence, though constant, was not enough to fill the emptiness. He was a thoughtful boy, observant, quiet, but Daniel felt the distance that sometimes formed between father and son, a distance he could never fully bridge, a distance he knew had grown from unspoken words and the heaviness of grief they both carried. Tonight, however, something felt different. Perhaps it was the rain, or the strange restlessness in Lucas's footsteps upstairs, or perhaps it was Daniel's own intuition telling him that the long, quiet evenings would soon be broken by something unexpected. He had been preparing dinner when he first noticed the faint creak of the hallway floorboards, a sound so subtle that it could have been anything, but it carried a weight that made him pause, fork halfway to his mouth, and listen with a careful, almost fearful attention. Memories of Elena surged unbidden, her voice, soft but commanding, her laughter, that rich, warm sound that could make even the darkest days feel bearable, her hand, gentle on his shoulder in moments when he felt lost, but alongside that, there was guilt, a deep, gnawing guilt for the moments he had missed with her, for the words he had left unsaid, for the times he had taken her presence for granted, for the times he had let work and routine and the dullness of life replace the care he should have shown. He remembered one night years ago, when they had stayed up late talking about everything and nothing, the clock ticking quietly in the background, and he had promised himself he would never forget the importance of those moments, yet here he was, years later, feeling the hollow ache of promises kept only in memory. Lucas's footsteps came again, this time accompanied by a soft thump, and Daniel realized that his son was moving with intention, with a purpose that Daniel could not yet understand, and a shiver ran down his spine, not from fear but from a sudden, unplaceable hope that perhaps, just perhaps, the long night would not remain quiet forever. He looked around the room, at the faded photographs on the walls, at the clock ticking with a patience he envied, at the shadows dancing on the ceiling, and felt a strange connection to every moment he had lived here, every joy and sorrow, every lost chance and every tender memory, and wondered if he had been too blind to notice the small signs of life, of love, of hope, around him. Outside, the rain fell harder, drumming a rhythm that matched the tension in his chest, a rhythm that seemed to whisper, something is about to happen, and Daniel, without fully understanding why, felt his pulse quicken, a quiet anticipation threading through his veins. He thought of Lucas upstairs, the boy who had grown so quickly, who now carried his own thoughts and feelings with a seriousness that both impressed and worried Daniel, and he wondered what his son might be thinking, what might be driving the restless energy that had kept him from sleep. The house, which had always felt so empty at night, suddenly felt alive with possibility, with a kind of subtle magic that made the air feel thick and expectant, as though it were holding its own breath along with him. Daniel moved closer to the hallway, his bare feet making soft, hesitant contact with the floor, and listened more intently, catching the slight creak of a door, the faint rustle of movement, and something inside him stirred, a mix of curiosity, caution, and a strange, unnameable hope. He thought of all the nights he had spent waiting for things to return to normal, for the pain to fade, for life to regain its old rhythms, and realized that maybe normal was never coming back, and that perhaps, instead, something new, something unexpected, was trying to reach him tonight. His heart felt both heavy and light, an odd combination that made him feel alive in a way he hadn't in years, a reminder that even in grief, even in loss, there could still be moments of surprise, moments of quiet revelation, Moments where the world seemed to pause just long enough for life to whisper in your ear. The rain outside began to soften, and Daniel, standing in the dim glow of the living room, felt the edges of his loneliness blur, felt a warmth he had not known in a long time, felt the fragile, tentative thrill that comes when you sense that life is about to change in ways you cannot yet imagine. And all the while, Lucas moved quietly upstairs, unaware that the small actions he was taking, the choices he was making, would ripple through the evening in ways Daniel could not yet see, that the simple, quiet determination of a son who loved and understood more than he realized would soon break the long spell of sadness in the house, a spell that had held them all captive for too long. And as Daniel took a slow breath, steadying himself for whatever the night might bring, he felt a curious mixture of fear and anticipation, because he knew, deep down, that this night, unlike so many others, was not going to pass quietly. Something was coming, something subtle but powerful, something that would begin with Lucas, something that would change not just the night, but the hearts of both father and son in ways Daniel had never expected, and he could only wait, heart thumping, candle flickering, for the moment when the quiet would finally break. Lucas moved quietly across the hallway, each step measured and careful so as not to disturb his father, but inside, his heart raced with anticipation and nervous energy because he knew what he was about to do carried a weight far beyond his years, a weight that could bring hope or fear, and yet he could not ignore it. He had watched Daniel struggle with grief, with loneliness, with nights that stretched endlessly without laughter or warmth, and he had decided that tonight he would act, in his own small way, to spark a light in the shadowed corners of their home. With trembling hands, he reached the study door and paused, listening to the soft hum of the rain against the windows, the quiet ticking of the clock that marked each second with impartial patience, and the faint rustle of papers on the desk that seemed to whisper secrets of the past, secrets that Daniel carried silently and that Lucas wished he could understand better, if only to bridge the gap between them. He opened the door slowly, afraid of being seen, yet compelled by a deep sense of purpose, and set a small envelope gently on the desk, its presence almost unnoticed in the dim light except for the tiny hope it carried. Inside, a carefully written note that he had labored over in secret, every word chosen with love and thought, words meant not just for his father but for the invisible wounds they both bore, words meant to offer a bridge to something lost, something paused by time and silence. Alongside the envelope, Lucas placed an old phone that had belonged to Daniel and Mara, a relic from a past filled with unspoken longing, with chances not taken and moments that had slipped quietly into memory, and when Daniel would later see it, the sight would strike a chord deep within him, a chord that vibrated with recognition, with nostalgia, with the bittersweet ache of what once was and what could still be. Lucas returned to his room afterward, heart pounding, unsure whether he had done enough, unsure whether his small act would carry the impact he hoped for, and yet feeling a quiet satisfaction that for once, he had intervened, that he had tried to change the current of a night that otherwise might have passed like so many others, unnoticed and unremarked. Meanwhile, Daniel, completely unaware of Lucas's intervention, returned to his study after a restless walk around the living room, his mind swirling with memories and the lingering echo of emotions he could not fully name, and that was when his eyes fell on the envelope, so ordinary in appearance yet vibrating with something he could not yet identify, and his hands shook as he reached for it, curiosity and fear mingling in a cocktail of anticipation that made his chest tighten and his breath catch. The envelope felt heavier than it should, heavier with meaning, heavier with unspoken words, and when he opened it, the note inside revealed not just a message but an intention, a quiet orchestration of reunion, of reconnection, of courage that had come from the heart of a boy who understood his father better than Daniel sometimes realized, and the words on the paper brought tears to his eyes, tears he had not felt for years, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and a longing for the life he had once known. Lucas had written carefully, acknowledging the sadness that had lingered, but also urging his father to remember that happiness was still possible, that old love could still be found, that life did not end in grief, that moments of joy could be reclaimed, and that sometimes, all it took was a small act of bravery to open a door that had long been closed. Alongside the envelope, the phone buzzed quietly, signaling a message or perhaps a missed call, a reminder that connections once lost could still be reached, and Daniel, holding the phone in his hands, felt his heart respond before his mind could catch up, feeling the stirrings of something he had thought dormant forever, something that made him remember Mara, her laughter, her eyes, the way she had made him feel alive in a way no one else had, the warmth that had been missing in his life since her absence, and suddenly he understood that Lucas had not just left him a note, he had given him a lifeline, a chance to step toward a moment he had been too afraid to seek on his own. The rain outside slowed but did not cease, tapping softly against the windows, and in that gentle rhythm, Daniel felt a quiet pulse of hope, a subtle nudge that this night would not end like the others, that something meaningful was about to unfold, that the envelope and the phone were not just objects but symbols of possibility, of courage, of the quiet bravery of a son who loved his father deeply and understood the longing he carried. As Daniel dialed Mara's number, hands trembling slightly, memories flooded back, not just of love, but of unfinished conversations, of letters never sent, of dreams deferred, of moments lost in hesitation and fear, and yet, as Mara's familiar voice answered, warm and soft yet carrying the same strength he had once adored, Daniel felt the tension in his chest ease, felt a thrill of nervous anticipation, felt a strange combination of fear and excitement that made the rain outside seem like music, accompanying the start of something fragile and beautiful. They spoke carefully at first, words measured, tentative, but gradually their voices grew more open, more honest, revealing regrets, acknowledging distance, recognizing the passage of time, and yet through every hesitation, every pause, there was a current of connection that neither had expected, a sense that perhaps what had been lost could, in small ways, be found again. Lucas, listening quietly from his room, did not intrude but remained attentive, sensing the subtle changes in his father's expressions, hearing the small laugh that slipped past Daniel's lips, feeling the soft intake of breath that accompanies hope, and knowing without words that his act had worked, that his small intervention had opened a door not just to conversation, but to a possibility, a renewal, a chance for his father to feel alive in the warmth of connection again. Daniel ended the call with a sense of awe and uncertainty, heart still pounding, realizing that the night had shifted from ordinary to extraordinary, that the quiet darkness had been broken by courage, love, and small acts of faith, and that everything was beginning to change, not with dramatic declarations, not with sudden events, but with subtle, human moments, small gestures that carry immense power when guided by intention and care. And in the stillness that followed, with rain softening to a gentle drizzle, Daniel held the phone close, envelope unopened but still present on the desk, thinking of Lucas and feeling a surge of gratitude and love so deep it almost made him ache. And he knew that this night, unlike countless nights before it, would be remembered forever, not just for the call, not just for the note, but for the realization that even in grief, even in silence, even in moments of fear and doubt, the smallest acts of courage, acts of love, could create ripples that transformed hearts and lives, that began with a son who had chosen to act, who had chosen to reach out quietly in the dark, and that all of it, this chance, this opening, this shift in possibility, had started simply because Lucas had done what he had done that night, a night that would never be ordinary again. Daniel sat in his study long after the call ended, the soft glow of the desk lamp reflecting on the envelope and the old phone beside him, and a strange energy hummed in the room, one that he had not felt in years, a combination of anticipation, fear, and a tender longing that made his chest tighten and his thoughts scatter like leaves in the wind, because speaking to Mara had stirred something dormant, something he thought he had buried under grief and routine, and yet it was alive again, fragile but unmistakable, a reminder that the heart does not easily forget what it once held dear. He traced the edge of the envelope absent-mindedly, feeling the weight of his son's thoughtful act, marveling at Lucas's quiet understanding, at the boy's ability to sense the void that had settled over their home, and at the courage it took for a teenage son to act with such insight. And Daniel realized, with a mixture of awe and emotion, that his son had become more than just a child of his past, he had become a bridge to the life Daniel had feared lost forever. The rain outside had slowed to a gentle drizzle, soft and rhythmic, and it seemed to echo the cautious heartbeat that Daniel could suddenly feel in his chest, a rhythm that matched the delicate stirrings of hope, of longing, of the realization that the past and present could meet in small moments of courage and communication. He picked up the phone again, hesitated, thought about Mara's voice, the way it had sounded so familiar yet so changed, like a melody remembered after years of silence, and he considered the conversations they had left unfinished, the letters unsent, the small confessions never spoken aloud, and he felt a wave of nostalgia that was sharp and sweet at once, a mixture of what was lost and what could still be found if he allowed himself to take the first step. Memories flowed uncontrollably, the first time he had truly noticed Mara, her laughter like sunlight spilling over cold days, the way she had made ordinary moments feel extraordinary, the quiet evenings they spent talking about everything, the way her presence had made the world feel softer, warmer, more alive, and he realized how much he had missed not just her, but the version of himself that existed when she was near, a version of himself who believed in joy and possibility, a version who had not yet been dulled by the weight of loss and regret. He thought of the life that had continued in her absence, the responsibilities that had claimed him, the long nights of worry and quiet despair, and he felt a pang of guilt for not seeking her out sooner, for letting fear and hesitation build walls where bridges could have existed, and yet alongside that guilt was a new determination, fragile but persistent, that he would not let this chance slip by, that he would not allow history to repeat itself, that he would embrace the vulnerability and uncertainty that came with reaching for something real, something beautiful, something that could rekindle not just love but life itself. Meanwhile, Lucas watched from his room, his heart quietly swelling as he noticed the small changes in his father, the way Daniel's posture shifted, the subtle smile that appeared and disappeared, the catch in his breath that spoke of awakening emotions, and he felt a mixture of pride and anticipation, understanding that he had set in motion a delicate chain of events, and that the night had become more than just a passage of time, it had become a turning point, a threshold to a new chapter in their lives, a night where courage and love intertwined in ways that were quietly profound. Daniel reached for the envelope again, finally allowing himself to read the note in full, each word resonating with the thoughtfulness and insight of his son, reminding him of the power of small gestures, of the way love could manifest not in grand displays but in subtle acts of understanding and care, and he felt a tenderness toward Lucas that deepened as he considered the boy's intuition, his empathy, his willingness to act for the good of someone else, a lesson Daniel would carry with him far beyond this night. Thoughts of Mara filled his mind again, and he allowed himself to imagine seeing her, to imagine her smile, the way her eyes sparkled when she laughed, the warmth of her voice, the softness of her hand in his, and he felt both excitement and fear, a thrilling mixture that made his heart pound in ways that startled him, as if reminding him that he was capable of feeling fully again, capable of embracing uncertainty, capable of stepping into a future that had been closed to him for too long. He considered the call they had shared, the words exchanged, the hesitations, the admissions of regret, the laughter that had returned in small, careful bursts, and he realized how much they had both changed, how time had reshaped them, and yet how deeply the connection remained, a connection that neither distance nor circumstance had fully erased, and he felt a warmth in his chest, a gentle stirring of hope, that perhaps love, once lost, could be rediscovered, nurtured carefully, and allowed to bloom again in a different, more tender form. As the minutes passed, Daniel imagined what it would be like to meet Mara in person again, to speak freely without the barrier of phones or letters, to feel the subtle intimacies of conversation, the shared smiles, the soft glances that speak more than words, and he realized how much he longed for connection, for understanding, for a reminder that life could still hold moments of beauty and closeness despite its hardships. Lucas, listening silently, felt the pulse of life return to their home, felt the quiet magic of a father beginning to awaken, felt the fragile promise of change, and he knew that his small act, the placement of the note, the careful selection of the phone, the quiet intervention of a son's love, had set a ripple into motion, a ripple that would not only bring his father closer to Mara but also bring a sense of light, hope, and renewal into their lives, a night that would mark the beginning of new possibilities and subtle transformations. Daniel's thoughts continued to spiral, each memory, each feeling, each sensation layering over the last, a whirlwind of emotions that left him breathless, excited, and vulnerable, reminding him that life's most meaningful moments often arrive quietly, without fanfare, yet carry the potential to transform everything, and he understood that tonight was one such moment, a night that had begun with small, quiet gestures and now brimmed with the promise of reconnection, love, and the delicate thrill of something just beyond reach, waiting to be embraced. He thought about the future, about the careful steps he would need to take, the conversations to be had, the honesty and vulnerability required, and he felt both apprehension and exhilaration, the duality of hope and fear intertwined. Because love always carried risk, always required courage, always demanded that one step forward even when the outcome was uncertain, and yet the alternative, the life continued in shadow, in quiet longing, in muted grief, was no longer acceptable. And he understood that he was ready to embrace possibility, ready to reclaim fragments of joy, ready to reconnect not just with Mara but with a sense of himself that he had almost forgotten existed. And so, Daniel remained in the study long into the night, the rain outside fading to a soft whisper, the envelope and phone resting nearby like anchors of hope, his mind racing with memories, desires, and dreams, his heart stirring with emotions both familiar and new, knowing that the night, which had begun like so many others with quiet loneliness, had transformed into something alive, delicate, powerful, and full of potential, a night that would mark a turning point, not just for him, but for Lucas, for Mara, and for the fragile, beautiful, complicated threads of love, longing, and human connection that had been quietly weaving together, ready to blossom into a story that none of them could have anticipated, a story that began with courage, with empathy, with small acts of care, and now stretched forward into a future that held the promise of rekindled hearts, whispered dreams, and the tender awakening of love once thought lost, a night that would remain forever etched in their memories as the moment when quiet hope became unstoppable, the moment when connection returned to the spaces that had long felt empty, and the moment when hearts, guided by the smallest gestures of understanding and bravery, began to beat together once more. Morning came softly, with pale sunlight filtering through the rain-soaked windows, painting the living room in muted gold tones, and Daniel sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea, still feeling the echoes of the night that had changed everything, his thoughts swirling with anticipation, nervousness, and an unfamiliar lightness that made his chest feel alive again, because the conversations with Mara, the small gestures from Lucas, and the quiet courage that had unfolded in the dark hours had shifted something inside him, a subtle but powerful realization that life, no matter how heavy or lonely it had felt, still held moments of joy, connection, and love, moments that could arrive when least expected, moments that could open doors to healing hearts, and Daniel knew that today would be different, that this day carried the promise of beginnings, of reconnection, and of the delicate beauty that comes when hope is allowed to bloom in the spaces left by loss. Lucas moved around quietly, making breakfast with an air of calm purpose, careful not to disturb the fragile bubble of energy that now filled the house, yet fully aware of the weight of what had happened the night before, the act he had taken to place the note and the old phone on the desk, the subtle bravery that had set the chain of events in motion, and he felt a quiet pride in knowing that he had not only offered his father a chance to reconnect with Mara but had also reminded him that love, tenderness, and joy could still be found in unexpected ways, that life's beauty often arrives wrapped in subtle gestures and acts of care, and that even the smallest actions can ripple outward to change hearts, homes, and futures. Daniel glanced toward the envelope once more, now slightly worn from being opened and read, and felt a surge of gratitude for the thoughtful planning of his son, for the love embedded in every word, for the quiet wisdom of a young heart that had recognized what his own heart had been too cautious to act upon, and he realized that Lucas had given him not only hope but also a lesson in courage, a lesson that reminded him that life moves forward only when we allow ourselves to take small steps toward what matters, even when fear and doubt whisper that we should remain still. He thought of Mara again, her voice like a memory wrapped in warmth, the familiar tone that had once been part of his happiest days, now mingled with the hesitance and growth that time had layered upon them both, and he felt a flutter of nerves mixed with excitement as he prepared to see her later, knowing that meeting her face to face would carry all the vulnerability, intensity, and thrill of emotions they had shared through their tentative conversations, yet also a promise of something new, something tender and deeply meaningful. Lucas poured tea carefully, noticing subtle shifts in his father's expression, the way Daniel's eyes occasionally sparkled with anticipation, the small soft smile that seemed to appear more freely now, and he felt a deep satisfaction that the quiet, thoughtful act he had taken the night before had succeeded, that he had helped restore not only a sense of connection between his father and a woman from his past but also a sense of life returning to their home, a life that had been dulled by grief and routine, and he realized that this day, this morning, was a culmination of courage, empathy, and love, a moment where past and present could meet, where wounds could begin to heal, and where hearts could find the tender beat of hope once more. Daniel stood, stretching slightly, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease as the sun warmed the room, and he thought about the meeting ahead, the first face-to-face encounter with Mara after so many years, and he considered how to express the mix of nostalgia, longing, and careful optimism that had built over the past nights, knowing that the conversation would require honesty, openness, and a willingness to allow vulnerability to guide his words, but also feeling a quiet thrill that perhaps the moment would be transformative, that it would mark not just a reconnection of hearts but the start of a chapter defined by understanding, tenderness, and the rediscovery of the joy that had once seemed lost. Outside, the morning air carried the fresh scent of rain on earth, a crispness that felt like renewal, like a quiet promise whispered through the leaves and the soft wind, and Daniel stepped to the window, watching the droplets glisten on rooftops and tree branches, feeling the rhythm of life pulse around him, a rhythm that now resonated within his own heart, a rhythm that spoke of second chances, of subtle miracles, of the way love can quietly weave its way back into life when we least expect it, and he smiled softly, thinking of Mara and Lucas, and how each of them, in their own way, had contributed to this gentle, remarkable awakening. Lucas approached, carrying a plate with breakfast, setting it in front of Daniel without a word, and the silence between them was comfortable, filled with mutual understanding and shared anticipation, a quiet acknowledgement that the events of last night had changed them both, that bonds had been strengthened, that hearts had been nudged toward courage, and that life, despite its challenges, had a way of reminding us of the beauty and possibility that exists when love and bravery meet in the smallest gestures. Daniel took a deep breath, sipping the tea, feeling warmth spread through him, and he reflected on the long nights of loneliness, the grief that had shadowed his days, and the moments of quiet despair that had seemed endless, and he realized that grief, while heavy, had also taught him patience, empathy, and the depth of love that remained even when someone is gone, that every memory carried a lesson, and that every act of courage, no matter how small, can lead to ripples of hope and connection. That change lives in profound ways. He glanced at the envelope once more, thinking of Lucas, the boy who had acted with such insight, and he felt a deep swell of gratitude, pride, and love, knowing that parenting was as much about guiding and teaching as it was about learning from the unexpected wisdom of a child, that life's lessons can come from places we least expect, and that love, whether romantic, familial, or platonic, has the power to transform ordinary moments into extraordinary ones, creating memories that will linger long after the day ends. As the morning stretched on, Daniel prepared himself to leave the house, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement, aware that Mara was waiting, that this meeting was a step into unknown territory filled with vulnerability, honesty, and the potential for emotional fulfillment, yet he also felt ready, strengthened by the events of the previous night, by Lucas's courageous act, by the phone call that had reminded him that love can survive time and distance, and by the quiet, steady realization that he could embrace hope once more, without fear, without hesitation, fully and openly. He paused at the door, looking back at Lucas, who met his gaze with a small, knowing smile, and Daniel felt the unspoken bond between father and son, the deep understanding, the shared knowledge that life had shifted subtly but irrevocably, and that together they had created a bridge between past regrets and future possibilities, a bridge built on courage, empathy, and love, and he felt a surge of emotion that was tender, profound, and invigorating all at once, reminding him that life's most meaningful moments often begin quietly, without spectacle, but carry immense power to change hearts and futures. Walking out into the soft morning light, Daniel felt each step grounded in purpose, guided by hope, and buoyed by the love surrounding him, and he thought of Mara, imagining the first glance, the first words, the first shared smile, and he felt the subtle thrill of anticipation, the gentle rush of longing, and the quiet certainty that this meeting, this day, was not just a continuation of their story but a new beginning, a chapter full of promise, tenderness, and emotional depth, a chapter that would remind them both of the resilience of the heart, the courage found in small gestures, and the beauty of allowing love to return when it is invited with honesty and care. Lucas waved softly as Daniel left, his heart light and full, feeling the satisfaction of having played a part in rekindling joy and hope, and he understood that life, while unpredictable and sometimes painful, also offers opportunities to heal, to reconnect, to love, and to be loved, and that even the smallest acts, the quietest choices, can create ripples that transform ordinary days into extraordinary moments, leaving hearts open, alive, and ready to embrace the possibilities that await. Daniel's steps carried him forward, each one infused with anticipation and courage, ready to meet Mara and face the delicate balance of past memories, present emotions, and future possibilities, aware that the journey of reconnection, forgiveness, and love is often gentle, gradual, and profoundly moving, and he felt a surge of gratitude for the night that had begun with quiet courage, for the son who had acted with wisdom and care, and for the heart-opening moments that had reminded him that life, even after grief and loss, can return to us in beauty, tenderness, and love if we are willing to embrace it, fully, bravely, and without reservation, carrying hope like a fragile flame, ready to ignite a future filled with connection, joy, and emotional richness that would linger in memory for years to come, a night and a morning that had transformed the ordinary into something unforgettable, and set the stage for the reunion, the romance, and the heartfelt, life-affirming story that was waiting to unfold.